We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. There are no agenda changes, and with that, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Mr. Biondo?
Present.
Mr. Booker?
Present.
Mr. Boomer? Here. Mrs. Crosby? Here. Mr. Fellers? Mr. Fiducia?
Here.
Mr. Girl?
Present.
Mrs. Floral?
Present.
Mr. Hoffman?
Present.
Mr. Jury?
Present.
Mr. Kelly?
Here.
Mr. McDonald?
Present.
Mr. Nicolosi?
Here.
Mrs. Red? Mr. Salgado?
Present.
Mr. Schultz?
Here.
Mr. Tassoni?
Present.
Mr. Webster?
Here.
Mr. Westcott?
Present.
Mr. Wilson?
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clerk McCall. With that, I will ask everybody to stand, and I'll turn things over to Mr. Jury for the prayer and pledge. Thank you.
Thank you. Let us stand a moment in silence for those who lost their lives in the state of Florida, and also for all those who have paid the ultimate price as our first responders that have lost their lives protecting us. A moment of silence, please. Thank you. Heavenly Father, we have bonded us together in common life. We seek blessings on the task before us. Help us in the midst of our struggles, justice, and truth, to comfort one another without hatred or bitterness, and to do our work with clarity and accuracy. And bless those who serve in the uniforms at home and abroad. In this Jesus Christ's name I ask, amen.
Amen.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Again, good evening, everybody, and we do have some guests with us tonight. The 2017 class of Eagle Scouts. If I could have you come up and join me, if that's okay, come on up. And if there's any of our leaders or any of the adults that work with these young men, please, you're welcome to come on up as well. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Long time no see.
Yeah.
So we got a lot to celebrate here tonight. We have a proclamation in recognition of the 2017 class of Eagle Scouts. Whereas the Boy Scouts of America is a youth service organization supporting more than 250 local councils, and it's the second largest scouting organization in the world. Whereas the Boy Scouts of America were founded on February 8th, 1910 in Washington, D.C. by Chicago publisher William Boyce. And whereas the total youth membership in traditional and non-traditional programs is approximately 2.7 million people. And whereas the Boy Scouts of America offers venturing, a youth development program, including skills development in the areas of adventure sports and religious life. And whereas the Boy Scouts of America offers programs related to citizenship, health, wellness, and character development. The organization also conducts various outdoor activities, including food collection and community and conservation projects. And whereas to earn the Eagle Scout rank, a Boy Scout must fulfill the requirements in the areas of leadership, service, and outdoor skills. To advance through the ranks, they must pass specific tests that are organized by requirements and merit badges. And whereas the Boy Scouts are an invaluable asset to Winnebago County by their values, volunteerism, leadership, and good citizenship. Now, therefore, be it resolved, I, Frank Haney, and on behalf of the County Board, here recognize the 2000 class 2017 class of Eagle Scouts for their perseverance and dedication on earning the prestigious Eagle Scout Award. And as we applaud these parents and leaders, we just want to pass along that we expect great things from these guys in the future. So if you don't mind, let's give these guys a big round of applause. Nobody wants to say any words, so we're going to take a quick picture and then we'll get on with our next item of business. Step on up here. Come on up here, guys. There.
One, two, three. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations, guys. Thank you so much.
Good job, man. All the best in the future.
Next item of business, the approval of minutes. May I please have a motion to approve the minutes from January 25th, 2018, and to lay over the minutes of February 12th, 2018. I got a motion by Mr. Hoffman. May I have a second on the approval of minutes? Mr. Girl, any questions by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Minutes passes. Thank you very much. Next item of business, announcements and communications. Clerk will call.
The items listed below were received as correspondence.
And we will place those on file. Thank you very much, Clerk McCall. Next item of business, board member correspondence. I will start with Mr. Webster.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. I passed out this piece to everyone here just a little bit ago, and it's an article written by Greg Johnson that appeared in the Register Star here recently. And he really hits on all the things that we've been talking about lately regarding the corrections officers and so forth. And so the things that he said in there, I think, are worth level of consideration. When I saw this letter in there, I knew that it came from someone that really knew what they were talking about or had some background or something. So I found out who the guy was, and I wanted to call him, and I had a long conversation with him. And as it turns out, the guy is a 30-year veteran of working for the county in corrections. So I think that you can see that he speaks from being there, doing that, and he's been around the block on this so many times there. So please read this while you're sitting here, reread it again, and then I'd like to speak again a little bit about it after this comes up for the vote, which I'm quite sure is going to pass quite handily this evening anyways, but I would like to speak to it again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would personally like to thank you for attending the Black History event last Saturday at Memorial Hall. And I'd also like to thank you for the proclamation that you give Memorial Hall for hosting 10 years of Black History. Thank you.
Thank you, and great job, and thank you for your leadership on all things Veterans Affairs. Thank you very much. Mr. Girl.
Thank you, Chairman. Just hopefully, I know last year about this time that we had the Harlem boys and girls bowling team in here for their state championship title. And again, this year the Harlem girls repeated as state champs, and Hononegah boys took the state champion title. So I would like to give out a little, kudos to them, and maybe we can have them in again, seeing that they're repeat champs. So. Just good to see that the county is actually showing up in state sports now. It's back in my time as an E-Rab, it was very far and few in between. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Girl, and congratulations as well to our two state champs. Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and in regards to the Eagle Scouts here present, I've had an opportunity in my lifetime to have known at least two, and I would just say congratulations to you, your parents, your mentors, and I've known all to at least move on and be stellar, persons of the community, and congratulations to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tassoni. Any other board member comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to the chairman's report, and I'm going to turn things over to Carla. If you wanted to give an update. Carla.
I just wanted to update you on things that we're in process on. We're doing interviews for the management consultant for River Bluff. We have an interview this Friday, tomorrow, and then next Friday, and so we'll be making a recommendation to the operations committee the following week. Animal services, I talked to a consultant at an organization called Best Friends, and they're planning on visiting us for a couple of days in March. They're a not-for-profit organization, and they'll do consultations for free. What they do is they talk to management, they talk to outside partners, they talk to internal people like board members and administration, and then based on their interviews and knowledge, they'll make some recommendations for us. Not only how to possibly save some money, but also how to work better with our community partners. We're in the midst of the external audit right now. Molly's not here tonight because she's working, but I want to give her kudos for all the hard work she's done. They've been on site for a couple of weeks now, and we met with the audit partner today. She was very complimentary of Molly's work. She's done basically the whole thing all by herself, and that's not typically how an audit would be conducted. So I just really want to thank her for all the time and effort that she's put into it, and she's really valuable to the county. Some of the things we're working on as far as policies, if you come in my office, you'll see a whole list on my whiteboard, but the ones that we push to the front are the budget policy and timeline. I'm going to first present that to our budget review team, probably the first week in March, and so that we can bring it to committee on March 15th and have it in place by the March 22nd board meeting. And then we're also working on a vehicle policy. I don't know if any of you read the auditor's report on our vehicles, but we've identified a lot more vehicles than were listed in that report, and we need to address how we're going to treat those for employees on their W-2 forms. Ann's pulled together the purchasing policy. She's spent a good deal of time on it. Now it's in Molly and my court to look at. Since Molly's been so wrapped up in audit, it probably is going to be next week before she gets any time to look at that, but we're trying to push that forward as quickly as we can. And then there were some changes in the laws related to the sexual harassment policy, so we're going to try to get those pushed through pretty quickly and presented to the board for adoption.
Okay, any questions for Carla? Yes, Mr. Webster.
Thank you. Just a comment on a portion of that. I'm very happy to see or hear that we're finally getting some definitive numbers on our vehicles and vehicle usage. Myself and I think Mr. Jury have been asking for something like this for years, and so I appreciate the fact that our auditors and administration have gotten down to the meat of the matter here, and so we'll find out some savings somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. The only other thing I had, a couple items, just wanted to point out the majority of board appointments are advised, at the recommendation of the chairman and then officially approved by the board. There are a couple of organizations that it's not part of our protocol to have board approval, so it's just, I guess, technically my appointment. The Community Action Agency is one of them, and I just wanted to disclose that Jay Hanley is an attorney for the Rock River Water Reclamation District. I'm going to be reappointing him to the Community Action Agency. Just wanted to put that on the record. The other thing, that just an FYI to board members, on March 21st, it will be the day after the primary election, is the Chamber of Commerce State of the County. There'll be more information forthcoming. If any board members want to meet with me to kind of talk about that presentation or any thoughts you have on that, I'm game to chat anytime. We're going to be focusing on that here in the coming weeks, so just want to put that out as an FYI to the board. With that, I can move on to next items of business, the consent agenda. May I please have a motion to approve the consent agenda, which includes the raffle, report, and bills. Mr. Boomer on the motion. May I have a second on the consent agenda before the board? Mr. Hoffman and Mr. McDonald. Any questions on the consent agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Consent agenda is approved. Thank you very much. Next item of business, our standing committee reports, and we'll start. I think last time we didn't have much of a report from Mr. Biondo, and we made up for it tonight. Mr. Biondo is back with our finance committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a short speech here. No such thing. I don't think I'll do that. All right. We have the Finance Committee report. I have items B through Q, ordinances to abate Winnebago County alternate bond property tax levies to be read in.
Thank you very much, Mr. Biondo. They're read in.
All right, I'd like to suspend the rules. I make a motion to do so.
We have a motion by Mr. Biondo to suspend the rules, which will allow us to vote this evening. I have a second by Mrs. Crosby, Mr. Jury, Mr. Boomer, and Mr. Girl. Threw a hand up as well. Any questions? This is merely the motion to suspend the rules, and so we can vote tonight. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. We've suspended the rules. Mr. Biondo.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to make a motion then to approve items B through Q for the ordinances to abate those various alternate bond property tax levies.
Okay, we have a motion to approve B through Q on the levies by Mr. Biondo, a second by Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Jury, Mr. Girl. Any questions on items B through Q taken as a package? So what we'll do on an ordinance is we'll do a roll call vote. Are there any board members opposed to this motion? Seeing none, I will ask Clerk McCall to cast a yes vote for all members present, and it passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Biondo.
Yes, and I have one last item. I'd like to read in item R. Does that, but amendments don't have to be, I guess it is. Budget Amendment 2018-17, corrections to be laid over.
We got we're reading that in. Thank you very much, Mr. Biondo.
And since we had public safety and finance there, and the vote was 11-1, I'd like to also suspend the rules on that.
We have a motion by Mr. Biondo on item R, which is the budget amendment. This would add the corrections officers. We have a motion to suspend by Mr. Biondo and a second by Mrs. Crosby, Mr. McDonald, Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Tassoni, and Mr. Girl on the motion to suspend. All those in favor of suspending the rules and voting this evening signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. We have a no vote by Mr. Schultz. All other board members cast a yes vote. Motion to suspend passes. Mr. Biondo.
I'd like to then make a motion to approve Budget Amendment 2018-17, corrections for $351,697.
I have a motion by Mr. Biondo to approve item R, which the corrections officers, and a second by Mr. Westcott, a second by Mr. McDonald, Hoffman, Jury, Wilson, Nicolosi, Tassoni, and Mr. Girl. Any discussion by board members on the item before you, which is item R? Any questions or comments by board members? Seeing none, we'll take a roll call vote. Are there any board members who are opposed to this motion? Mr. Schultz, we will cast a no vote for Mr. Schultz. We will cast a yes vote for all other board members present. Motion passes. Mr. Biondo.
Thank you. That is conclusion of our report.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh, we have a follow-up. Mr. Webster.
Yes, I did say I wanted to follow up on this. I think that once you read this piece that I put out, and I think it makes total sense. I'm glad we finally got some relief for the officers up there. If that relief is really needed, which apparently it was, But what I'd like to see is us following up on the suggestions on this letter from Mr. Greg Johnson. And if the other board members are in agreement, I'd like to see us send this back to Mr. Fiducia's committee to see if we can find a group to do the study for us and what it would cost or so forth, and see if we can't get this done through the PSST tax, because I think it's something that's really needed. And if a bipartisan or independent group, whatever, does this study, then we'll truly know if we are overstaffed or understaffed in there, because we've been going round and round about this for far too long. As he points out in this letter, he's correct. And so if we get an independent study of this done, I would greatly appreciate it. We might have 2 more than we need or 3 less. So I don't know how other board members feel, but I'd kind of like to hear from them if we could send this back to committee to have a look at this.
We'll refer this to the Public Safety Committee. I have one more thing, then we'll move on to the Zoning Committee. Mr. Hoffman?
Thank you, Chairman. Just so the board knows, most people, I brought this subject up 2 weeks ago. And in fact, Mr. Green reported it in the newspaper. So this isn't the first time we've heard this. I brought this up to the sheriff and to the whole committee. In my experience at the detention home, that we have staff to inmate ratio. So this isn't, I'm glad you brought it, but it's not new news.
Exactly.
Okay? I do agree with it though.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hoffman.
You're exactly right, but the time has come, we need to move on this. Mr. Fiducia has actually talked about this, I think, just recently at one of his committee meetings. And so what I'm trying to say to you is, these aren't just words. These are some words that it's time for us to take some action on this. Okay? Thank you too, Joe.
We have a couple hands up, and then we have, just so we're clear, we have voted on item R, we have passed that, but I do have a few hands up, and since this is a topic that clearly has interest, we'll get a couple more statements, then we'll move on. Mrs. Red.
Thank you, Chairman. I guess my question, and I'm not quite clear on this, is courthouse security included in this?
This was for 10 corrections officers in the jail.
That's what I thought. Now,
That is just for the corrections officers in the jail. Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've talked before in committee about doing a staffing and best practices study. However, I don't know what the procedure would be to hire an organization for that, if we're going to need 3 or they have to take bids, or how it would be done. So I'd be more than happy to bring that up to the committee, but I'm going to need direction on if we need to take bids or how we would do that and present it to the board. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Fiducia. Mrs. Goral.
Thank you, Chairman. Can we make a motion on this so that we make sure it gets done? Make
Right.
a motion on the fact that we would like to have this study done? Can't do that?
There's nothing on the agenda for official action, so it does need to go to committee for discussion. And I would only add this bit of context, and this was mentioned at the Finance Committee. This move did a couple things. And number one, it addressed a short-term issue in the jail. Number two, it took care of an ASME grievance that's been long-standing. Number three, the sheriff was very clear that he is committed to a couple things. Number one was the idea of process discussions in his department. Those are similar, perhaps in nature, to other process reviews, some of which Carla has indicated that are going on at the county board departments, and the sheriff is in for those discussions. The thing that I echoed in the Finance Committee and would echo now, that obviously we want to work in partnership with the sheriff on a study in that particular department, because number one, he's on board for that discussion, and we'll need that to be an important part of things. The other thing is the sheriff echoed very clearly his commitment to working and living within budget on a go-forward basis, and asked for more time in which to get to the budget that has been set forth by the board. That would extend into next year. He was very clear on those couple of items and wants to work together and have some representation on our internal and external budget review committee or budget review team that Carla referenced and work together in some other process improvements that we're talking about internally at the county. So I just wanted to be clear, and so we had all that on the record. Yes, Mr. Gurl.
Thank you, Chairman. I guess my only concern or request about this would be that it would be from a outside agency, not among our staff or the jail staff that does this study, survey, whatever it be a reputable business that this is their business. So that would be my one request. Thank you.
I think there's agreement in talking to board members and talking to the sheriff that everyone's very open to that. So I don't think that's going to be a problem. I look forward to the upcoming discussion. So thank you very much on those couple additional comments. We'll move on to the zoning committee. Mr. Webster.
Just a point of order.
I'm sorry, Mr. Piano, I forgot all about you.
No,
I apologize. I am so sorry.
No, that's okay. The point of order is I was done in 5 minutes.
Let the record reflect Mr. Biondo took A through R and completed before all these extra comments in about 5 minutes. How could I forget to overlook Mr. Biondo? Mr. Webster.
Thank you. Your zoning committee has 4 items on the agenda this evening. They were laid over from our prior meeting. So for the record, number 1 is Z 1917, number 2 is SU 1117, number 3 is V 0317, and number 4 is V 0417. And so with that, I would like to move to approve number 1, which is Z 1917.
We have a motion by Mr. Webster on item 1Z 1917. May I have a second? Mr. Jury and Mr. Tassoni. Any discussion on number 1Z 1917? Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could I just ask Mr. Krupp what happened when you went back to ComEd and asked whether or not they were open to reducing the size of this map amendment?
Mr. Krupp's not here this evening.
I could either refer that to Mr. Webster, or we do not have a member. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Dornbush is here. Mr. Dornbush.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Krupp reached out to ComEd, the representatives of ComEd that have brought the petition forward, and considering they requested to move it forward on the basis of things that were discussed in ZBA, the floodplain, which is undevelopable area, the size of the substation, and where the power lines run all across the property. It's a pretty minimal amount in the grand scheme of things, so they requested that you consider the item before you tonight on that. And they're not in the business of selling off all property, essentially.
Thank you very much, Chris. Any other follow-ups by board members on item 1 before the board? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. We have Mr. Schultz, Mr. McDonald, Mrs. Crosby.
Roll call.
We have a call for a roll call, please.
Mr. Fiducia?
Yes.
Mr. Girl?
Yes.
Mrs. Gore?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Jerry?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. McDonald?
No.
Mr. Nicolosi?
Yes.
Mrs. Red?
Yes.
Mr. Salgado?
Yes.
Mr. Schultz?
No.
Mr. Tassoni?
Yes.
Mr. Webster?
Yes.
Mr. Westcott?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Biondo?
No.
Mr. Booker?
Yes.
Mr. Boomer? Mrs. Crosby?
No.
And Mr. Fellers is absent, so. We have 14 yes, 5 no, and 1 absent.
Thank you very much, Clerk McCall. Motion passes. Item number 1 passes. Mr. Webster.
Okay,
Point of order.
Yes, Mr. Schultz.
Mr. Kalingas? Yes. What's the supermajority requirement out of 19 people present?
For the rezoning, just looking at that. Chris, what is the rezoning has? Is it, we need a map of it?
That amendment would need a supermajority.
Yeah, this is a map. Correct. It would be three-quarter vote of the board if it's been denied. Were there any objections filed?
No objection for file to it. And I believe it went through zoning committee with a positive recommendation. Correct. It would not
This is just based on.
That's not my understanding of a map amendment. That a map amendment requires a supermajority.
If it's been denied by the ZBA, that's correct. My understanding is it was not.
Okay, I'd just like for the record it to be noted that that is not my understanding, and we may need to revisit this if I'm right about that.
So we will move forward with that passing. We will note Mr. Schultz's comment and double check that, and if necessary, revisit it. But our understanding at this point is that this motion is appropriate. It is passed with the proper majority vote. Yes, Mr. Biondo.
The other thing to be checked also is the fact that, is it the attendance vote or the entire vote, the entire board? Because a lot of times the budget amendments, everything else, it's the entire board whether we're here or not.
Yes, Mr.
With my sheet here that I put together doing this says it's a three-quarter vote of the board. Yes.
So for example, to Mr. Biondo's very eloquent point is on a budget amendment, it takes a supermajority of the board whether there's full attendance of the board or not. So you need that magic number 14. This would be different, but we will confirm that. Okay, thank you, Mr. Biondo, very much. Mr. Webster.
okay, that being the case, if we have decided that was approved, then I would make a motion to take number 2, number 3, and number 4 as a package together, and I would move to approve.
We have a motion by Mr. Webster to approve number 2, 3, and 4 under the zoning committee, and I got a second by Mr. Kelly, Mrs. Gorel, and Mr. Jury. Any questions by board members on 2, 3, and 4? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed?
No.
I have a no vote by Mr. Schultz. Any other no votes? Mrs. Crosby will indicate all other board members to cast an aye vote. Motion passes. Mr. Webster.
Okay, that's all we have, except to announce that Wednesday, March 7th is the next ZBA meeting, and February 28th is our next zoning committee meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webster. Next item of business, we have Mr. Westcott, Economic Development Committee.
Thank you, Chairman Andy. First, before I start, I want to thank my committee for the diligence they did for the host fees. Everybody involved. And it really made a lot of difference. Over 5 hours we took to get this done, and we did it. And here we are tonight with a resolution approving recommendations for the 2018 host fee grant awards, and I move.
We have a motion by Mr. Westcott to approve the 2018 host fee awards. I got a motion by Mr. Westcott, second by Mr. Wilson and Mr. Boomer. Any questions by board members or comments? Mrs. Red. With that?
That was a second.
Oh, we also include Mrs. Red on the second and Mr. Wilson on the second?
No, one.
Oh, Mr. Wilson on a comment. Thank you. Sorry, I got a little discombobulated there. Mr. Wilson, you're up.
I would appreciate it if all board members would approve this. As Mr. Westcott indicated, we spent a lot of time and discussions caring for the host fee disbursement. So please take that into consideration.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. Any other comments by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. We have Mr. Schultz on a no vote, and we'll cast an aye vote for all other members present. 2018 host fee awards are approved. Mr. Westcott.
Thank you, everybody, for that, and that concludes my report.
Just want to thank Mr. Westcott for his help on this program. I also want to thank Julia, who did a great job administratively on this process. Really appreciate both your leadership. Thank you very much. Next item of business, Operations Administrative Committee, Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Chairman Haney. Your Operation Administrative Committee has one resolution before you this evening. And that resolution is appointing Gus Gettner to the position of Chief Financial Officer of the County of Winnebago, Illinois, and I move for its adoption.
We have a motion by Mr. Jury on the approval of the Chief Information Officer position, and that Mr. Gettner would fill it. A second by Mr. Kelly. I believe I saw a hand up by Mr. Westcott, Mr. Boomer, Mr. Webster, and Mr. Wilson. Any comments on the item before the board, the approval of Mr. Gettner? Mr. Webster.
Yes, I've got to know Mr. Gettner fairly well over the last few years in IT. I've stopped in there many times. They've always been extremely helpful and ready to take care of my problems right away, even with all those tablets that we have. So I highly recommend us for this.
I say this with all due respect to my friend Mr. Webster. I saw part of that tutorial with Mr. Gettner and Mr. Webster, and Mr. Webster brings a lot to the table, but his IT prowess is not at the level of maybe our IT guy. So Mr. Gettner, thanks for everything you do, and look forward to working with you for a long time. Any other questions by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. I'll ask, I have Mr. Booker on a no, Mr. McDonald, and Mr. Schultz. Any other no votes? Seeing none, motion passes. Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Operations Committee will be having a meeting next Thursday, so note that in your notebook. And Gus, let me be the first to welcome you aboard, and thank you for the fine job that you do. I appreciate it. I know a lot of us do. Welcome aboard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jury. Public Works Committee, Mr. Kelly.
No report.
Okay. I know the next time around we need to bring that line bike resolution. There's when Mr. Dunn.
Bike sharing.
Bike sharing, yes. Bringing that agreement cost neutral, but we need to get that through here at our next board meeting since it's come through committee. Next item of business, Public Safety Committee, Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have no report, but now that you asked, last month at Animal Services we had 657 calls. We intook 134 dogs, 108 cats, the notorious famous potbelly pig, 1 cockatool, 3 domestic rabbits, and 16 pieces of wildlife. We rescued 14 dogs, 11 cats, and we rescued the cockatool. That concludes our report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fiducia. Entertaining as usual. Unfinished business, I would just say an ongoing discussion with the courts and with our new Chief Judge, Judge Doherty, is positive and productive, and there's a theme that is emerging that I wanted to share with the board publicly. That theme is twofold. Number one, what I'm hearing from Judge Doherty, and it's actually very encouraging, is that there's a willingness by the courts and by the judge to work in partnership with the board and the administration going forward in a positive manner. In consequence, I believe there is a willingness by the board to be mindful of the fact that the courts are separate. They are separate from the county, but they are needed to partner with us with the challenges we have financially. And I think as we go forward, looking at that from both angles is important. So I do appreciate Chief Judge Doherty and some of the conversations that have been ensuing, and I'm positive about the future. Any new business by the board that any board member would like to add before we talk board appointments? Seeing none, we'll move on to board appointments. I know there was a mention by a board member of potentially suspending the rules tonight so we could move these appointments forward. But the three are the appointments would be for 12 Mile Grove Cemetery Association, 2 6-year terms. Both are reappointments, Ronald Mitchell and Richard Zimmerman. And then the Northwest Fire Protection District, Charles Barnes. And I wanted to ask if there would be a motion to suspend the rules and vote this evening. I got a motion by Mr. McDonald to suspend the rules, and then a second by Mr. Westcott, jury, Mr. Wilson, and Mr. Tassoni and Mr. Gorel to suspend the rules. All those in favor of suspending the rules signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, we will suspend the rules. Then I'll go to Mr. Jury.
Thank you. Are these positions paid?
No, my understanding is that none of the 3 positions are paid positions.
Do we know that for sure that they're not paid?
I am 100% certain that the fire protection districts are unpaid positions. I'll go to Mr. McDonald, who's our guru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's too much credit to call me a guru. I can state at North Park Fire Protection District, the trustees are paid out of the fire department funds. I think it's like $800 or $1,000 for the entire year. I can also say that I spoke with the chief at Northwest Fire Protection District. Their 3rd member has been in Arizona. They haven't had a member for quite some time. That's the reason for me asking to suspend the rules so they could once again operate it with all 3 of their trustees. I do not believe Northwest pays their trustees.
I stand corrected on that. Sorry, we didn't have that clarified for you, Mr. Jury. Mr. Jury, and a follow-up.
I just wanted to clear that up because it was knowledge to me that I didn't know, and I wanted to make sure everyone knew it. Thank you.
Well, and I think you're raising an interesting point. As we go forward, maybe what we'll do is put a notation if it's a paid position. I will say the vast majority of those that we appoint to are unpaid. The one that does pay a little bit, it's in the range of a county board stipend. Not that that's a huge amount of money, but that's the Water Reclamation District with Mr. Hansen's organization. That's the one that pays a little bit. Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And like I say, I'm not sure on the actual stipends or pay, but when it comes to volunteer firemen, if it was some sort of pay, is it just per board or per meeting or something like that? And I would just commend the volunteer firemen for what they do and all that they do for no compensation or very minimal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tassoni. With that, I'd entertain a motion to approve. Oh, Ms. Julia.
I would just point out on the executive summary, there is a compensation line item, and it does note that for the Board of Health, the secretary does get a small stipend, but we don't have an amount. So typically that is less than $1,000 a year. We can find out what that amount is for you in the future though.
Thank you very much, Julia. I would entertain, I'd ask a board member to make a motion to approve the board appointments. I got a motion by Mrs. Crosby to approve all 3 board appointments. I got a second by Mr. Westcott and Mr. McDonald. Any discussion by board members on these three folks? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. All 3 are appointed. Appreciate your courtesy on that this evening. With that, I would entertain a motion to go to closed session. Entertain a motion to go to closed session for a short discussion and update. I got a motion by Mrs. Crosby. Need a second on closed session, please. Thank you, Mr. Biondo. A second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? We'll go to closed session. We'll get about a 2 or 3 minute break and then we'll get going. Thank you.